Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to Chatham House. Good afternoon for those who connect to us from different time zones other than London. My name is Katerina Busel and I'm a Robert Bosch Stiftung Fellow with the Russia-Eurasia program. And on behalf of Chatham House, I would like to thank you for joining us today to discuss a very poignant issue, not only for the Central and Eastern Europe, but for the whole world. A special gratitude is to Katerina Aleynikova, formerly our colleague at Chatham House and who is now with the Learning and Work Institute, for coming up with an idea to have this event and contributing a lot to make it happen. Our extraordinary speakers today will present for 10 minutes each, and after that we will open the floor for the Q&A session. We're really blessed with the very special speakers today because the corona pandemic, as we know, has raised another pandemic of domestic violence, which has acquired new financial and other dimensions, and it has its particularities in Central and Eastern Europe. Oksana Pokalchuk, the director of Amnesty International Ukraine, will explain how this dynamics of addressing domestic violence has developed in Ukraine recently during and post-lockdown. Then Alena Popova, a co-founder of You Are Not Alone project in Russia and the co-author of the draft law preventing and countering domestic violence, will speak about the developments in Russia. And then our special guest, Ms. Marceline Naudi, the president of the Council of Europe group of experts on action against violence against women and domestic violence, will provide a bird's eye perspective as to what's happening in the region and why the countries should join the Istanbul Convention and what additional support it provides to the victims of domestic violence and how it helps to counter it. We will start with Oksana. Oksana Pokalchuk, Director of Amnesty International. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I will start. I believe it's an open secret that there has been an upsurge in domestic violence, not only in Ukraine, but the world over during COVID-19 lockdown. We know that as of the first half of 2020 alone, the National Police of Ukraine has registered 101,000 reports and complaints regarding domestic violence, which is 40% more compared to the whole year of 2018. During the first 31 days after the quarantine measures had been taken, the national hotlines for domestic violence prevention registered no less than 2,051 complaints, and 86.6% of the complaints were filled by women. I'm talking now of the data we have access to. As of now, there is no all-Ukrainian database on this kind of violence. Statistical data provided by the police, social services, courts, and hotlines are full of major discrepancies. Nor is there a unified methodology of processing the data in a way that would enable us to understand specific dynamics of development of changes in the intensity of domestic violence. The fact that there are no precise complex statistic data affects the possibility of authorities to grasp the scope and the nature of these challenges. Hence, the authorities are hampered when it comes to development and funding of an effective response. According to the data provided by the grassroots organizations, economic and psychological violence has gained an intensity, resulting, of course, in physical violence. Since it is mostly women who hold low-paid, low-qualified, and often unofficial positions, they can be easily deprived of their work, fired, or made redundant. This is exactly what happened when quarantine regulations were announced. Many women lost their jobs and were forced to come back to their abusers. According to the Global Gender Gap report of 2020, the expected income of women in Ukraine is 61% of that of their Ukrainian male counterparts, compared to 63% in 2018. Women in Ukraine remain underrepresented in the political sphere and therefore have limited opportunities to introduce the laws and policies that govern their lives. Patriarchal sentiments and discriminatory stereotypes remain deeply ingrained in political discourse and media and society. Ratification of the Istanbul Convention might impact this dismal order of things, as well as provide standards for the government to collect data on domestic violence properly, as well as analyze them with a view of filling the gaps in the system of the response of domestic violence and to making such improvements visible. Amnesty International has been calling on the government of Ukraine to ratify the Istanbul Convention for 5 years now, but these efforts have been constitutionally hampered by so-called various anti-gender groups, such as, for example, Council of Churches, the organization uniting the main churches of Ukraine. They openly oppose the ratification of Istanbul Convention and engage in systematic pressure on MPs, threatening to prejudice the MP's constituency against him or her if he or she does vote for ratification of the convention. Other representatives of anti-gender groups are right-wing radical groups who are known for their arrogant attacks against those who support the ratification of the Istanbul Convention. Despite the fact that these groups overtly engage in violence, they feel complete impunity, which encourage them to continue their cruel attacks. I would also like to touch on the topic on police response and perception of domestic violence. According to the report of women's organization NGO La Strada, 39 of national police staff who participated in the survey thought of domestic violence as a private business. 58% of responders agreed with the statement that victims of rape are at times themselves to blame for what has happened to them. 59% of responders believe that the majority of domestic violence cases are falsely reported, whereas the vast majority of those surveyed, and it is 81%, agreed with the statement that reconciliation should be the top priority for partners involved in a domestic violence case. The stereotypical perception of cases of domestic violence as family arguments leads to the fact that they are not taken seriously. Police officers seek for the abusing man or to protect him. Moreover, our research noted that police officers tend to reject the complaint, or they are reluctant to accept it. That is why women often do not report violence to the police. In addition, police officers may be pressured by their management to deal with so-called more serious incidents and devote their attention to them. Police officers interviewed by Amnesty International noted the absence or lack of appropriate gender sensitivity training and/or training that would clarify the new legislation norms on gender-based and domestic violence, as well as the one that would include briefings on its practical application. And it is worth noting that there have been examples of good practice and successful cooperation between local NGOs and police. However, most of them come from personal contacts of local activists with the police and/or a gender-sensitive approach by local police chiefs. Women are underrepresented in the law enforcement bodies. This disproportion is especially stark in the patrol police and undermines women victims' trust to the police. We are concerned about the fact that the government of Ukraine does not allocate adequate human and financial resources to the national, regional, and local levels to effectively enforce existing laws and policies to prevent all forms of domestic violence against women. Over the past 2 years, Ukraine's national legal and institutional framework has undergone significant changes in relation to gender-based violence, including domestic and sexual violence, which are in line with the principles and standards of international human rights law. However, I would like to draw attention to some aspects of new changes. At the national level, the division of domestic violence cases into administrative offenses and criminal offenses also creates gaps in the protection system. Under national law, the perpetrator must now be found guilty of 2 cases of domestic violence as an administrative offense before the next case can be classified as a systematic offense and potentially fall under the criminal code, which provides more severe penalties. However, if the offender is a serviceman who commits domestic violence, which can be deemed as such according to the administrative court, the case is dealt with in accordance with military procedures, and not in courts of general jurisdiction. In fact, in practice, it is not possible in a civilian system to report domestic violence by the military in such a way as to demonstrate its systemic nature. And as a result, servicemen cannot be prosecuted for domestic violence. In conclusion, there is an urgent need of addressing gaps in legislation, developing gender-sensitive protocols and criteria for law enforcement, including police, judges, and prosecutors, and placing crimes on a record, conducting investigation and prosecution of all cases of sexual violence, especially those related to conflict, as well as including such cases in transitional justice process. Finally, I want to say that despite the implementation of new laws and procedures, which we welcome, the Ukrainian government does not put enough resources toward practical implementation of this law. Thank you.
Oksana, thank you very much, and thank you for your brevity and keeping up with the time. I'm sure the audience, and myself included, have many questions to you, but we will turn to it when we have heard to Alona and Marceline. Dear colleagues, now we have the honor to listen to Alona Popova, who is extraordinary because she's got so many activities empowering women, from empowering and stimulating private entrepreneurship by females to, of course, raising the issues of equality in the families and catalyzing the changes in Russia's domestic response to domestic violence. Alona, the floor is yours.
First of all, thanks a lot, Oksana, and I would like to express my huge support to you for all you've done and for all you are doing there to support the victims of domestic violence and to create the system, the ecosystem to protect all females around our country. So thanks a lot. And thanks a lot to everybody who are here, just because I feel that I'm not alone. We are not alone here. I would like to start from one news that I have from the previous week. One deputy, his name is Sergei Veremenko. He sent a deputy inquiry to the investigation committee because, according to his claim, I use an awful amount or an awful statistic of the victims of domestic violence in Russia, and that's why I put a lot of harm to Russian Federation and to the Ministry of Interior. Actually, I use an awful statistics, and this statistics said that in Russia we have more than 16 million victims of domestic violence per year. It's an official statistics of the Statistics Committee of Russia. And of course, this is an awful amount. And this amount said us that we need to fight for the law against domestic violence, but still we don't have such kind of law. I am the co-author of this law just because 7 years ago, my best friend was beaten by her husband. She was pregnant. It was 8 months of her pregnancy. She lost her baby and she was beaten like, you see, I feel like I'm so sensitive to this case because she lived outside Moscow and she called me and she said, can you come please? Because I had an awful case and I saw her, she's alive. I saw her body with a lot of hematomas and scratches, and he broke her arm and she felt awful. And she said to me, please don't touch him because I feel that it's all my fault. This is all my fault. And he's a good guy. And the police representative, he was standing nearby me. He said that, Alona, you can't you can't do anything because we don't have the law in which we can, with the help of which we can protect your friend. We have only one case. If she said by herself that she is a victim of domestic violence, and this violence was done by this man, this man. After this case, I returned to Moscow. I ran for office to our Moscow State Duma. I decided not to run. I stopped my campaign, and I had my round table with the experts, the huge experts who was involved in creating the law against domestic violence in Russia. And I asked all the experts, look, dear ladies and dear men who are here, do we have 16 millions of domestic violence in Russia now? It was 2014. So they used the statistics of 2011, in which it was said, yes, we have such kind of amount of victims of domestic violence, and it's awful. It's an epidemic, it's a pandemic, and we need to stop it. After that, I was post-graduated from Moscow State University as a journalist. And after that round table that was organized by me and my perfect team, I decided to have my second degree as a lawyer, just because I would like to fight for the law against domestic violence. And for more than 6 years now, I am fighting for the law, I'm lobbying this law, and I'm the co-author of this law. But still I have the initiation of the crime against me from the deputy side. I have a lot of aggression from our family unions in Russia. I have a lot of, threats from the people around me. And my kids, I adopted the kids from orphanage, so they feel themselves unprotected just because everybody around them just repeated one thing that, look, you can be take out from your mother to the orphanage again, just because your mother fight for the law that intervene to our families, and we would like to protect our families. And can you tell to your mother not to lobby this crazy law? So we still don't have any restraining orders in Russia. We don't have any prevention measures to protect the victims of domestic violence. And we have a lot of crazy cases. Like we have Margarita Gracheva. She's a beautiful young lady with 2 sons. Her husband cut her arms in the forest. So he tried to rape her, and he beaten her in the forest. So after that, Margarita, for 2 years, was in the court in which she and her brilliant advocate lawyer, my friend Marie Davtyan, tried to explain to the judge that this crazy man, the offender and the perpetrator, should not have the father's right to the kids. And the judge, and she was the lady, asked that, Margarita, look, this man is the father of your kids, and if he tried to kill you, it doesn't matter that he is a bad father. So I described just one case, but we have a lot of cases, like more than 10 per week. And we have a lot of messages from the victims of domestic violence during one day. For example, tomorrow we have 200 messages to our project You Are Not Alone via Instagram from the real victims of domestic violence from the whole Russia, from different regions. And I don't know how can we help them. We try to help them with complaints and claims, We try to help them with the police, but everybody knows that in Russia we have a high percentage of police violence. And I wrote a lot in my Facebook page about these crazy cases concerning police representatives. That's why I think that I have now the initiation to crime, just because I try to beat the violence among the police representatives. But we can't guarantee to our girls and women all over Russia that we can protect them, because we can't have the restraining orders and we can't give them these restraining orders. We don't have such kind of law. In 2017, the domestic violence was decriminalized in Russia by our state Duma. It means that the first case of domestic violence, now it's not an offense. It's just the administrative, not the offense, the administrative case. You can pay for the domestic violence case 5,000 rubles. It's equal to the unwrong parking in Moscow. So look, you park your car wrong and you pay 5,000 rubles if you live in Moscow. And you beat, for example, your wife inside your flat, you just pay 5,000 rubles. So I think it's awful. We tried to stop it. We were standing in front of our state Duma with standalone demonstrations. We called it pickets, with my good friends, the lawyer, which I mentioned, whom I mentioned before, Maridovtyan, and the founder of Насилию нет NGO, Anna Revina. We sent a lot of petitions. We create the publication in our mass media Novaya Gazeta to Valentina Matvienko. She is the chair of Soviet Federation. This is an upper chamber of our parliament. So we try to say that, please, Valentina Ivanovna, you are a woman by yourself, and you are the very influential female politicians. Can you stop this crazy decriminalization of domestic violence? And she can't, I mean, she couldn't, because they vote for the decriminalization. And after that, our victims of domestic violence unprotected for 100%, like Margarita Gracheva, the case I described before, like, for example, Valeria Volodina. She was stalking by her previous boyfriend. She was beaten by him. And she sent a lot of complaints and claims to our police representatives, and police officers replied to that look, Valeria, this man just loves you so much. He can't let you go. After that, she won her compliance in European Court of Human Rights. And after she won, she had a lot of answers from our police representative, still with the same arguments. We can't initiate any crime just because this man loves you so much. So this is the real situation in Russia. But I have the positive final. I mean,
could you please conclude quickly, and then we'll turn to the details.
My conclusion is that for 100% we will win, for 100%, just because we are not alone.
Thank you very much, Alena. Thank you very much for your impressive work and still retaining that positivity and determination. And obviously we'll go into the details in the Q&A session. And now we have the honor of hearing Ms. Marceline Naudi, the president of the Group of Experts on Action Against Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence from the Council of Europe. And I'll just briefly explain why we are so happy that Marceline has kindly agreed to speak. Well, the Council of Europe is famous and known for adopting the principal instrument addressing domestic violence, the Istanbul Convention. And as much as it was greeted by numerous human rights groups and numerous governments, unfortunately, it also faces certain backlash, because Poland recently said it would withdraw, and the countries like Ukraine, as Oksana has explained, raised different arguments, fearing the word gender or lobbying certain religious traditional values, not to implement the instrument that provides additional mechanisms protecting all kinds of protecting women against domestic violence. So it would be wonderful to hear Marceline's view on why the convention is so important and how do we counter the prejudice that many people unfortunately still have against it. Marceline, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm just setting up. I hope you can all see my my PowerPoint here, yeah?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So thank you very much for inviting me. It's an honor to be here, and I greatly appreciate that you have given us this opportunity. I would like to start by pointing out that the Istanbul Convention, which is the Council of Europe Convention that you've just talked about, is the first of its kind. It is the first legally binding instrument to provide comprehensive measures addressing prevention of violence, protection of victims, prosecution of perpetrators, and integrated policies, what we call the 4 Ps. So prevention, protection, prosecution, and policies. But the most important thing is that it is a legally binding instrument, obviously, to those who actually ratify it. So I'll just quickly give you the state of play in relation of ratifications. So the Council of Europe, as many of you will know, has 47 member states, and 34 of those, that is just over 72%, have ratified the convention. So just to explain, there are 2 stages to entering the convention. First, you sign your intention, and then you ratify. And once you ratify, then you are legally bound by the convention. So 34 out of the 47 member states, which include countries which are not member states of the EU, of course, such as Turkey, Serbia, North Macedonia, Georgia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and etc. 72% have ratified, have bound themselves by the Istanbul Convention. 11 Council of Europe member states have signed their intention to ratify, but not yet ratified. And these are Armenia, Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, Hungary, Latvia, Liechtenstein, Lithuania, Republic of Moldova, Slovak Republic, Ukraine, and the United Kingdom. So that is just over 23%, so less than a quarter of the member states have signed but not yet ratified. And then, of course, we have the Russian Federation and Azerbaijan, who are the only 2 member states of the Council of Europe which have not even signed their intention to ratify. We also have, because the Council of Europe Convention is open not only to Council of Europe member states, but also beyond. So we also have 2 non-member states of the Council of Europe, Tunisia and Kazakhstan, that have expressed interest to join the convention and have started taking steps towards the signature of the Istanbul Convention. However, some have stalled. So although we are very pleased to have over 72% who have ratified, it would be great, wouldn't it just be great, to have 100%, and indeed others from outside the Council of Europe member states. So some have stalled. There's been some misinterpretation of the convention, of articles in the convention, and these are the sort of objections that have been put forward, which were briefly mentioned now by Katarina. That the concept of gender is foreign to many legal systems and is therefore incompatible with domestic legal norms. That the convention attempts to recognize a 3rd gender or to legalize same-sex marriage. That it challenges traditional gender roles and traditional values that are beneficial, seen as beneficial for families and public life of society, and that it has an unjustified focus on women. the Council of Europe and Grevio are at pains to and are constantly working to demystify these myths that continue to be prevalent amongst some states, and told some more. So some Council of Europe member states have sought the opinion of their constitutional courts to assess the compatibility of the convention with their legal framework, with their constitutional legal framework. So, for example, Bulgaria did that, and the Constitutional Court found that the Istanbul Convention violated the Bulgarian constitution because allegedly it introduced unclear concepts such as gender and gender identity, which are not in line with the Bulgarian legal framework. And, for example, Hungary and the Slovak Republic have resolutions in their parliaments to request their government not to ratify the Istanbul Convention. So these are things that, well, they cause me quite a lot of distress, I have to say, because we have, the Council of Europe, the Grevio, have been at pains to explain again and again and again that there are certain myths which need to be demystified, which need to be better understood. We have seen, of course, a worrying trend in some of the signatories to the convention of precisely misrepresenting the aims of the Istanbul Convention. So we have seen signals emerging about attempts to backtrack on reforms and measures, including attacks on sexual and reproductive health and rights, shrinking resources for women NGOs and support structures, and coordinated movements, under the anti-gender ideology, which was mentioned by Oksana. And these are opposing progress on gender equality and women's human rights, as well as LGBT rights, on the basis of misconceptions and false narratives. And of course, the Istanbul Convention has been particularly targeted by such attacks. But I would like to point out that this is not new. This is not something that has happened within the last few months. A couple of years ago at another conference, it was necessary for me to say this. This is a copy and paste from a slide of another conference of 2 or more years ago. The objective of the convention is not to regulate family life or family structures. The convention requires governments to ensure the safety of victims who find themselves in dangerous situations at home or are threatened by family members, by spouses or intimate partners, which unfortunately is the most common form of violence. The convention does seek to change mentalities, to move away from gender stereotypes and sexist attitudes. And indeed, we heard Alona earlier talk about, it was actually Oksana who spoke about victim blaming amongst the police and considering it a private matter. So the convention does seek to change mentalities, these sort of mentalities, move away from gender stereotypes, move away from sexist attitudes. And I would also like to point out that the Istanbul Convention is the result of long discussions, and believe me, I know because I was there in what was called at the time the CAVIO, the Council of Europe Ad Hoc Committee on Violence, which drafted the Istanbul Convention. Long discussions, eventually leading to its unanimous adoption by all Council of Europe member states. It's based on policies and legislations which are tried and tested and which have produced positive results at the level of member states. So very quickly, what is the state of play of the monitoring? As Katerina pointed out, I am the president of Grevio, and Grevio is the monitoring body of the Istanbul Convention. So we visit the various countries and we check how well they have implemented the convention. We've monitored 17 states so far. We've published 14 first baseline evaluation reports. So that is 14 reports, evaluation reports on specific countries. At our forthcoming plenary meeting, hopefully we'll examine with a view to adopting 3 additional reports. So we will then have 17 reports. We've also published our first general report of activities covering our first 4 years of functioning, which is from June 2015 to May 2019. The convention has already had a tangible and a positive impact. We can already see positive results from the convention. It has propelled gender-based violence to the forefront of public debate, and it has increased victims' and society's awareness of the urgent need to combat it. And it has also resulted into introduction of higher legislative and policy standards at the national level in a number of countries, both as a result of having been evaluated, of having been monitored, and also prior to being monitored, so in preparation, in the work that they are doing to be seen to be fully implementing the Istanbul Convention. Of course, we have challenges, and these are general challenges that we have found in countries. There's the issue of the gender-neutral approach, which we find, which is not in keeping with certain aspects of the convention. The issue, we ask for official coordinating bodies which should be institutionalized, have given enough resources, etc. And sometimes we find that this is not the case. Support services for victims of violence against women, although we have seen an increase in various countries about in relation to these, still there is an issue. Still we have certain countries who do not have sufficient support services, or who do not have them sufficiently distributed across the country. So, for example, they have them in towns and cities, but not in rural areas, for example. There's the issue of child custody and visitation rights. And again, this was mentioned by Alona now in this case, when she spoke about, so to speak, the father's rights, that he still, even if he is a violent perpetrator, he still will have rights to visit the child. And there are various issues around this, around courts actually prioritizing parental rights of the perpetrator over the well-being of the children. There's an issue in some places with mandatory mediation in civil procedures and divorce proceedings, especially that address child custody matters. So the Istanbul Convention says you cannot have mandatory mediation where there is domestic violence. You can have mediation, but it cannot be mandatory. So it can be something that they choose to do, but it cannot be something that they have to do. And again, in some countries, it still exists, mandatory mediation, but also sometimes it's not called mandatory mediation, but it's quasi-mandatory mediation. But in effect, it works out to mandatory mediation, because if the women, the women survivors do not actually go through it, then they face negative consequences, especially in relation to their children. And the issue of protection orders, which was also mentioned by the previous speakers. So the change in attitudes, which is so important. The convention requires a change in harmful attitudes, stereotypes, behaviors. And at heart, I always say, it is a call for equality between women and men. We need to continue to work towards equality. We need to open our eyes and acknowledge the abuse that exists around us, all of us, the person in the streets, the politicians, the professionals. We need to call out the men who abuse women and children. Often our focus is on what society should do or it can do, what women should do, what they can do. But really, we should also be talking about why are there so many men who think they can control and abuse women and children? And that would take us back to changing our attitudes. So this is where the Istanbul Convention requires us all to act and to change. Change attitudes towards women and men. Change attitudes for their role in society and what we think is appropriate for a woman or a man to do. All of these things need to change to ensure that women are considered fully equal to men, also in relationships, both in public life and in private life. The concept note had something about COVID, so I'm just going to quickly go through a slide on COVID, if that's okay.
Yeah,
so,
so if possible, within like 2 minutes, and then we address the rest in the Q&A.
Okay, so
thank you.
The pandemic, okay? Okay, so to be clear, the convention has one and only one principal objective, that is to combat violence against women and domestic violence, to make this a legal obligation and a political priority by recognizing that violence against women and domestic violence are unacceptable. So by ratifying the convention, what that state is saying, for us, violence against women, domestic violence are unacceptable. There is that political commitment. Also, by ratifying the convention, the state would share experiences and good practices from the implementation and application of the convention with the states parties. That is, the other people who have, the other states rather than people, who have signed and ratified the convention. And this in itself is an added value because we can all learn from each other. And it also means becoming part of the community that defines further action at the international level, because then you become a member of the committee of the parties that are representatives of all the states that have ratified the convention. What it is not, what the convention is not, it is sometimes said that traditions, values, family relations will in some way be damaged, that family law will be changed. This is not the case. And indeed, Armenia asked the Venice Commission of the Council of Europe for an opinion on this, and the Venice Commission clearly confirmed this, that this is not the case. Something else I would like to add over here is that when we talk about family, where there is domestic violence, there is not a family. A family is somewhere where we feel safe, where we are secure. Where there is domestic violence, there is no safety, there is no security. So when people say things like, you are breaking the family is broken. What we are actually doing is giving people who have been broken in such situations to start anew, to start afresh.
Thank you very much, Marceline. Thank you for being so clear, but also giving such a heartfelt presentation. And it's really an honor to hear from the person who has nourished like a child this whole concept of safeguarding women against domestic violence. So thank you. I see that the questions are gradually appear in the chat function. So please do join by typing the questions there, or as I said, raising your electronic hand. But I will abuse my position as a speaker very quickly, asking the first question, and then I will turn to the question from Mr. Halid Datswell. My question is to Oksana Pokalchuk, and we spoke about like the many layers and dimensions that underpin domestic violence. But in the case of Ukraine, it is also the situation of the armed conflict, which hugely impacts both the dynamics and the response to domestic violence. So my question is, Oksana, indeed, how are both the dynamics and the response to domestic violence in Ukraine connected with the same dynamics as regards the sexual-based violence in the armed areas, in the areas of armed conflict, and also with the sexual violence from the police and the law enforcement authorities, which, as we know, notoriously has not been properly investigated in the region, but also in war-affected Ukraine? Thank you.
Thank you for this question. So, I mean, in eastern Ukraine, within 20 kilometers on both sides of the line of contact, 3.5 million people are affected by the conflict. The total length of the line of contact between the government-controlled and non-government-controlled territories of Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts is over 420 kilometers, and most of these people, 2 million, are women, children, and the elderly. An OECD-led survey on violence against women reveals another unexpected fact, that a significant proportion of women who consider themselves victims of the conflict associate the conflict with the violence they have experienced. It turns out that 79% of women in Ukraine, those current partner was involved in the conflict, say they had experienced domestic violence, while the percentage of those who had experienced domestic violence and those current partners were not involved in the conflict stood as 58%. So gender-based violence during the conflict is more prevalent, and it is silenced, of course. and it is silenced due to the number of facts. It is military presence, it is low security, widespread actual or existing impunity for perpetrators of violence, economic crisis, destruction of existing family structures, as what was said before, and weakening communities, vulnerability of various levels due to forced displacement, of course, constant psychological pressure, complete or significant lack of rule of law, and insufficient or no infrastructure, including institutional services. So there is numerous of facts why, for now, we don't have sufficient information on what is going on there. But I want to announce that in November, our Amnesty International is going to present a report on gender-based violence on the eastern part of Ukraine. And I hope on that date, on the time, we will be able to present information on roots of the violence and the way how government can influence on the situation, how we can pressure on the government to influence on the situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oksana. Yeah, it's really scary how many issues are touched by that, because it's also the issue of the mental health of the service people and how that impacts the mental health within the family. So hopefully the armed conflict will be the sad catalyst for more action against both domestic and conflict-related sexual violence. Mr. Harry Datswell could voice his question aloud. Could you, Harry?
Hello, yes. My name is Harry. I work in the British Embassy in Moscow, and I cover human rights. And domestic violence is something we're very keen to be helpful on. And my question is to Ms. Popova, just asking for an update on the campaign to change the legislation. I understand it was withdrawn, but I also don't think it's been stopped entirely. So are you hopeful that it can be brought back on the agenda? And how much support do you think you've got in the Duma and in the Federation Council? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for your question. So the chair of the upper chamber of our parliament, Valentina Matvienko, announced that they will have the first hearings of our law during this year. It means that up to the 1st of January. So 3 months ago, Valentina Matvienko said that they postponed the law until they win in the battle with coronavirus. So now she changed her position, and I know from Oksana Pushkina, she is the only deputy among 450 deputies in our State Duma who fight for the law against domestic violence for all this term. I mean, for the 5 years. So I called her and I sent her the messages via Telegram with the question, should we start our campaign to be more vocal now because of the announcement of Valentina Ivanovna? And she said yes. So for me, it means that the law will be discussed in the next months in our parliament for sure.
Thank you very much, Alona. Now we have the question from Maxim David, which is very relevant, not just for domestic violence, but for many human rights issues. The question is to Alona Popova. In relation to the so-called foreign agents law in Russia, could you say something about whether you see this as having affected attempts to connect to external NGOs working on gender-based violence and or your ability to address such issues in Russia? I don't know.
Thanks a lot for this question. This is a really actual question for us because we are all of us who are fighting against domestic violence. We call foreign agents, spies, crazy feminists, foreign agents. Of course, we are foreign agents for 100%. That's why we feel a lot of pressure on our financial resources. that we can ask for, because we can't collect any financial resources here in Russia, which is enough to fight domestic violence. We tried, but we have the lack of the resources, as you see. But we can't ask the international NGOs or international financial support, because if any, we will be announced as foreign agents. And for us, it means that we can't effectively lobby our law, and we can't fight publicly for the law, because our public opinion from the region, from the people who lived outside Moscow, in our regions, the public opinion now just shift to the side that Russia is occupied by foreign agents and surrounded by foreign agents, and we need to fight against foreign agents. And for us, it means if we have the mark that we are the representatives of foreign agents, the effectiveness of our action rapidly decreased. But I think that in near future, somebody from our side, for example, myself or some of our colleagues, will be oppressed by the official, by our officials in terms of our activity, and with the reason that we are foreign agents. I think so.
Thank you very much, Alona. May I ask please to unmute Ms. Nadzia Husakovskaya, and could you please introduce yourself and ask your question, Nadzia? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Nadzia Husakovskaya. I'm a researcher at Amnesty International here in London, but I have been working with Oksana Pokalchuk in her office in Ukraine, specifically on the report that Oksana mentioned on gender-based violence in Eastern Ukraine. I have two questions. One is a very concrete one, and another one is a broader one, and I think I address it to all three presenters or whoever wants to answer them. The first one, I wanted to ask, when we went to missions in Eastern Ukraine and talked to women, a lot of them said that on the one hand, they lack services for women, but on the other hand, they said that no one works with perpetrators. So there is lack of this work. So I wanted to ask the presenter, can you say, is there any work done that you know of by government bodies or by NGOs that is successful, or do you think it's needed? And maybe Marceline can add about the monitoring results in terms of maybe best practices, or what is the state of when it comes to perpetrators. And the second question, I found it's very fascinating for me the way what Marceline and Oksana as well said about the resistance to Istanbul Conventions. And I wonder, because I think one of the things that maybe haven't been mentioned, but I've been thinking a lot about it, that this resistance can be framed in a way of East-West divide, when East doesn't want the West, in a way, you know, to impose their norms. So my question would be, if we think about it as a resistance not only to family values, but to European or Western values, including LGBT, gender, same-sex marriages, do you see any attempts now to reframe this discourse beyond Istanbul Conventions, to find other ways of alternative ways of, you know, saying it from more local perspectives that would not escalate this tension between East and West? That's two of my questions. Thank you.
Marceline, Oksana, who would want to start?
You talked about a lack of services, which is, of course, one of the things that I did mention. Both for the victims, but you point out also for the perpetrators that there are no services to help perpetrators change their behavior, change their attitudes. The Istanbul Convention, of course, does require perpetrator services. So when we talk about changing attitudes, we're talking, as I said, the person on the street, the politician, the professional, the victims themselves, because the victim blaming also, as we heard from Alona in the very poignant example that she gave, often take it upon themselves and blame themselves and say, this is my fault, because society tells us that this is our fault. But also, of course, perpetrators. So the Istanbul Convention clearly requires perpetrator services, and it requires perpetrator services which are accessible, which are found accessible to all parts of the country, etc. It also it also strongly recommends that perpetrator services should be also court mandated, so that one of the ways in which perpetrators can be made to take a service is that they are court mandated. So that's what I can say about perpetrators. In relation to you're looking at this as an East-West divide, I really wouldn't like to do that. I really wouldn't like to do that. First of all, because there are many countries in the East. There are at least some countries in the East, what is considered the East, although I would ask what is considered the East, but never mind, let's put that aside for now, who do support the convention, who are very proud to support the convention and very pleased to be able to do so, and they do so. And indeed, we sometimes have. I mean, when somebody talked about the backlash is present not only in East Europe, but I'm sorry to have to break this to you, but it's very strongly present in West Europe as well. So I really would not like to have this divide. What I can say, however, is that sometimes the Istanbul Convention, to use it as an example, if you will allow me, is seen as some of the things that this foreign Europe is imposing on a particular state. But again, you can hear those comments both in East/West. Okay, so that's what I can say about that. That yes, sometimes there is a certain sort of hostile attitude towards Europe as a foreign concept, foreign thing that is imposing on individual states.
Thank you very much, Marceline. And before we turn to Oksana, can I just feed into another connected question from Catherine Warren, who actually asks, as regards this divide, why the UK has signed but not ratified the convention? And Catherine says that she was not aware of that and is rather surprised. Could you comment on that, Marceline, please?
Comment on why the UK has not ratified. It has signed its intention some time ago, but no, it has not ratified. I cannot comment on why, because you will have to ask somebody in the UK government to answer that question. Brexit might have something to do with it, like, you know, their attention might have been elsewhere, I don't know. But no, I can't. I have no, I mean, you know, I have no comment on why the UK has failed to ratify.
And may I ask just a small follow-up, but have you heard, because this is quite a usual argument, that the country says that they have a more effective domestic system of protecting women against domestic violence, and therefore there is no need to ratify the convention. Has it come from the UK as well?
Again, I can't comment on that. What I can say, however, is that if as a state you have things which go even beyond the Istanbul Convention, great, that's great. So ratify, because you have that minimum anyway, and you have even more. And by ratifying, you still have those additional benefits. One of making a clear political statement saying violence against women, domestic violence is completely unacceptable. Look, politically, we believe this. Look, we are putting our signature where our mouth is and ratifying this convention. And also, of course, there is the added bonus, if you like, of the Istanbul Convention. I'm going to use the word community, which is completely, of course, the wrong word, but where you can exchange good practices, ideas, etc. Share your good practices. If you have good practices which are even better than the Istanbul Convention, where you can share those practices and show your prowess in the area of violence against women.
Thank you very much, Marceline. And actually, the argument that you have just made reminds me of the argument the states make that when they don't want to ratify the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. They also say that we've got enough of domestic capacity to investigate and prosecute war crimes and crimes against humanity, which include sexual violence. But obviously, as you're saying, it doesn't prevent the states to have the stronger system at home. They will just make it even better by joining the specified international instruments. So I think it's true both for the Istanbul Convention and the Rome Statute. I'm sorry.
Just add one further sentence to that, which is you also have the advantage of having an outside, therefore more objective evaluation of your services, which can point out your better practices and also the areas where you could improve, which maybe sometimes when you're in it, you don't quite see. So I'll just, thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll turn to Oksana, who's still to answer the question from Nadia, and then there is James Nixon with a question and Maxim David as well. Oksana, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I will ask very quickly. So talking about these programs for abusers, something that is quite important, of course, to conduct it here in Ukraine. And as far as I know, there are a couple of initiatives here in Ukraine, which mostly coming from international organizations or local NGOs that are trying to introduce it. But in any case, it needs resources. And my question will be, isn't it really like the best place where these resources should be allocated? It's always like a question, if you have resources, where it's better to allocate them. And on the one hand, I do believe that it's a right time, and it is important issue to do these programs for abusers. But on the other hand, you know, everyday work with the victims of domestic violence, or with their lives and situations, and I would say that if we have a lack of resources, I would say that it's more relevant for Ukraine now to open new shelters rather than do and put resources into these programs. It's my personal opinion, of course, and I do believe that everything is important. Everything that's mentioned in the convention is important to be introduced into national law. But in a situation where we are staying now in Ukraine, I do believe that it's important to allocate this money to, first of all, to victims, and only after to abusers. But yeah. And second question about West and East. So in my humble opinion, I think that I do want to support this discourse about East and West. That is my issue. So I do believe, I see that these anti-gender groups, they're using this narrative to create, like, to demonize West and to use all that they can do, like all issues like LGBT, same-sex marriages, adoption, domestic violence, all everything that they want to include to demonize the West. And in our work here, I mean, in Ukraine, what Amnesty do, we try not to use this narrative. We try not to talk in this way, like East and West. We're talking about just general values, human rights, what is better to do, what Marceline said before, like Istanbul Convention is not saying nothing about family values. It's talking about victims. And that's, I think, is important, just not to support that discourse, but to talk in a different way and to share different information about this. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Oksana. And can we now unmute James Nixie, finally, who has been waiting to ask his question. James, please.
Great. Yeah, my name is James Nixie. I'm a colleague of Katerina's at Chatham House, actually. And first of all, could I thank the speakers for three devastating presentations, actually. I've learned a lot, and I'm very ignorant about this issue. Actually, I did want to return to the East-West divide thing briefly, and then I have another question after that for Marceline in particular. And actually, I see Magdalena Randall-Shab as sort of touched on this as well, but it's not so much that there's an East-West divide, but it does seem to me, please correct me if I'm wrong, but the problem does seem to be worse in Russia and many other states of Eurasia. Alyona talked about 60 million victims of violence per year in Russia, according to Russia's own stats committee. That's over 1/3 of the country. And not to diminish for 1 second that this isn't a horrific problem globally, in the UK, in the West, but it does suggest to me that it's more of a problem in the so-called East, let's say in Russia and the states of Central Eastern Europe, as per the title of this webinar. So if you believe that, and I'd be interested to know if you don't, why is that? And I don't really have any. I would only speculate that reasons might include alcohol, education, lack of it. Too much in the case of alcohol, too little education, and I suppose culture, which I think is what Magdalena was referring to as well. There is some sort of cultural difference, and I just ask if that is true or not, and I'm asking for, you know, Katerina talked about catalysts when she was talking about conflict-related stuff. So what, you know, I'm just asking, you know, why is this such a bad problem in this region? That's one question. For everybody. And then just for Marceline, I just have a specific question, if I may. Because you mentioned, Marceline, that the concept of gender is foreign to many legal norms and incompatible, therefore, with many legal norms. And I just ask out of ignorance again, because I'm not a lawyer and I don't really understand these things. You know, what does that mean in practice? Or what would it mean in practice if it were not incompatible with legal norms? What does that, I mean, I'm always asking Katerina, who's a lawyer as well, you know, to explain things to me as a layman in non-legal terms, but I'm not fully understanding what it means. And I guess what I'm saying, and I hope just to bind those two questions together, is all of the treaties and the conventions and the laws in the world can't help that much if there's not a change in culture and essential basic decent human behavior. So anyway, so I hope that's a clear question with regards to the legal norms, Marcelina, if that makes any sense. I'm just asking, what does it mean what does it mean in practice? Thank you.
Could we unmute then Marceline, and then Alyona and Oksana would follow up? Thank you.
Okay. Right. If you allow me to start again with the figures that were quoted. I mean, globally, we know that there is between 1 in 3 and 1 in 4 women who experience violence against women, gender-based violence, at some point in their lives. So that is globally. There is always a bit of a problem with data, as in what exactly is being counted. And indeed, Oksana mentioned this in relation to the Ukraine, that they don't keep formal statistics, etc. So there's always a bit of an uncertainty what exactly is being counted. Is that as a result of a prevalence report, or is that as a result of official police reports? Official police reports are normally much lower than the actual prevalence. So there's always a bit of an issue, specifically when we mention figures, unless we are clear exactly where they're coming from. That's just to throw it in. You asked, could this be because of alcohol? And immediately I jump, because again, research over the years has shown that whilst alcohol might aggravate an abusive situation, it does not cause it. So some people get drunk, as I'm sure you know, and just go like, oh, I love you, I love you, I love you. Oh, I love you, I love you, I love you. And some people get drunk and might become abusive. But the point is that it's not the alcohol that is causing it, okay? It's the abusive relationship and the dynamics within it. But the alcohol does aggravate, absolutely. It does. In relation to education, well, education, yes, which is again a lot of what the Istanbul Convention is talking about in terms of changing public mindsets, changing people's mindsets, and culture. I don't want to say change the culture because that might be misinterpreted completely. But what I'm saying is to work towards equality, equality between women and men. Then you ask about gender. And, you know, what's this whole sort of issue about gender? Gender is clearly defined within the Istanbul Convention as, and I'm not quoting it word for word because I've got a useless mind for quotes, but it is gender is a socially constructed concept which refers to certain roles and behaviors and attributes which a society considers appropriate for one gender or the other. So we're talking about gender role stereotypes, traditional gender role stereotypes, possibly. Okay, so within and the Istanbul Convention clearly states that this is not within the convention. We are not using gender instead of the word sex. Okay, so we are saying what gender is that socially constructed idea of what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a man. However, the issue is that the gender as a word, I mean, I'll tell you again, I was part of the CABIA, which was the deliberations to the discussions which led to the drafting of the Istanbul Convention. And there I remember many countries, often coming from the same language stem, so to speak, linguistic stem, saying, look, we don't have this word, we cannot use it, this word does not exist, we don't have this word. So there is a lot of misinterpretation and misunderstanding, if you like, around this term gender, notwithstanding that it is very clearly defined within the convention. And indeed, we've actually published little leaflets and booklets and online and, you know, specifically explaining this issue and this problem for people to understand and to try to demystify this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marceline. And can we unmute Alona and then Oksana to address James's questions? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks, James, for your question. I don't think that we have many cultural difference from the European world. No, we just don't have any legally binding instrument to protect the victims of domestic violence. Inside our literature, like Russian literature, we have a lot of books and many books about domestic violence in which it said that in this case the fault is a woman's fault, so this is all her fault. But in Soviet Union period, our men and women just in the papers were equal. In reality, of course, unequal, but in the papers concerning to the official Soviet propaganda, men and women were equal. My grandmother is 90, so she is Soviet feminist, and she was fighting during the Soviet Union period for the protection of victims of domestic violence. And of course, in that cases, we can't say that in our country the situation is much worse just because of our culture. No, the situation is worse just because of our system. We just have an oligarchy system with unequal instruments that they use, and with the authoritarian regime that we have inside our country, for example. All the authoritarian regime use the violence as the main ideology. So our authorities uses the violence as the official ideology. That's why they can't have the law against domestic violence just because the violence is going from our president's side. We have his quotation that the violence is okay if it's concerning to the terrorist. So the violence is the main thing that our government and not government, but officials use with the help of propaganda in our mass media. That's why our society starts to think that violence is okay. When we start our campaign, we think, and myself, I was thinking that it's all about our mentality, it's about our countries like post-Soviet Union region, and it's about the thing that it's all from our, like early times. But when I start our campaign, I understand that it's just the official ideology nowadays that protects the violence as the official ideology of our authoritarian regime. And this is the answer for your question. It's the only reason, and it's not about the difference from East-West side. They use the argument that we are the foreign spies or foreign agents, and they use from the side of our official propaganda this negative opposition East-West, just to unite all the fundamentalists that they can unite in our society. Is just the political aim. It's not the social aim. It's just the political aim. They need to unite all the people to increase the percentage during the election period. We all know that. That's why it's not about culture. It's about the politics, totally the politics. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Alena, and thank you for bringing up this whole violence ideology. Actually, I just thought about the parallel of Russia's official attitude of Hizb ut-Tahrir and the designation of this organization as terrorists, and then persecuting basically the Muslims because of their alleged affiliation with this organization. So I think it's so important to differentiate the real impact of a person or his or her violent behavior, and using their affiliation like with a certain gender community or with a certain religious community to suppress the freedom of opinion and to use it for persecution. So thank you very much for doing that rather bird's view. Oksana, could you please provide your view as to James's question?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I will start with information on one study. So according to the study conducted in 2018, more over 1 million of women, Ukrainian women, experienced sexual, emotional, or physical violence at home each year, within about 23 million adult women living in Ukraine. But why it happened? So I think there is a couple of reasons. First of all, we are a post-Soviet country, and for many, many years we were under the pressure from government. I mean, the society lived in that regime that it was not. I mean, women were not able even to ask for help because there were no. Like officially, there were no problems in Soviet families, of course, and plus the culture, of course, this totalitarian, if I can say this way, culture, which creates, of course, that sad dynamics in the families too. Another thing which is important for Ukraine is, of course, church. And the Council of Churches, which I mentioned before. So this organization and churches, of course, as they are, they use things about domestic violence and LGBT rights just to create more number of their supporters. And as far as I see what is going on, and on one hand they're saying about traditional values and things like that, but on other hand, we see that it just seems to be like a technology, just to create supporters and the pool of supporters. But church is really influenced has a great influence here in Ukraine. Even we don't have one church, we have a couple of churches, and with the different, I mean, we have Catholics, we have Orthodox, but in any case, all of them are they are united in these anti-gender ideas, and that is how I do believe they create their audience and develop their audience. And the last thing is education, of course. As I mentioned before, it's education for police officers. But on the other hand, it's very important to make changes in the school curriculum, and our organization works on that a lot. We try to include issues on equality and domestic violence issues in the school curriculum. And Council of Churches is, of course, opposed it very much. So I think that why it happening because of many reasons, and that we are post-Soviet country is important to keep in our minds. But on the other hand, people here in Ukraine and organizations and some MPs even have a vision how to change it. And I do believe that we are on the right way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oksana. And we've got the question to Alona from Barbara von Ove-Freitag. Alona, could you come back to the wider effect of COVID pandemic? Has it raised awareness of domestic violence in society in Russia? Do you see new wave of activism and campaigning, a new synergy between different initiatives? Any good examples of effective campaigning in response to COVID? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. When the isolation in our country, it was called self-isolation, started, we all NGOs, we have 9 NGOs which created a special chat to connect with each other in terms of domestic violence offenses and cases. We all understand that we need to cooperate. So during this isolation, COVID isolation, we started to cooperate with a huge companies, commercial one. Like we created, in 3 weeks, we created a special chatbot with Viber. This is a huge messenger. Free chatbot to help the victims of domestic violence with all the instructions what to do if you are the victim during the pandemic period. We created that with the help of chatbot or with the help of messenger, just because we understood that the victims of domestic violence can't or couldn't use their cell phones because the oppressor or aggressor, they were nearby and he controlled all the things that she can do with the help, or she could do with the help of her cell phone, especially if she needed to speak with the help of her voice. After that, in our cooperation with NGOs, we created the application, or I don't know how should I name it in English, the special open letter to our government to protect the victims of domestic violence rapidly. And what we saw, just because we started to cooperate, many grassroots initiatives from all over Russia, especially in far away regions like Дальний Восток or West Siberia or Arkhangelsk or Murmansk, they started to create their own chats, their own initiatives, art campaigns, using messengers, Instagram accounts, and so on and so forth. So what we saw is a rapidly increasing of the amount of domestic violence offenses, and also the rapidly increasing of the chain of initiatives in Russia among the society, like grassroots initiatives. I think that period was really successful for all of us because we had the case from Regina Todorenko. She's a very well-known TV host and a blogger here. And during her Instagram air, she said that the victims of domestic violence, that this is all their fault of the victims of domestic violence if domestic violence is happened. After that, all of our society, I mean the vast majority of our society, which is of course in internet, not in our TV channels, started to oppress her because they all decided that it's not true, it's not right. We need to protect the victims of domestic violence. And after that, they stimulate Regina Todorenko to create the special educational film, like movie. And now it's on YouTube with the main idea that it's not the fault of the victim, it's all the fault of aggressor. And with the idea of how can we unite with each other to protect us in our society against this crazy threat. So I think that this pandemic shows us or showed us the great examples of society initiatives. And for me, it means that our society runs faster than our officials and our government, for sure. Our society are mostly the brilliant people with a brilliant idea who can help each other, because we all understand that we can't trust our officials. That's why if we are in bad things with no help outside, we can call or we can think that only our society, our friends and people, our followers, the people who are nearby can help us. And this pandemic starts many initiatives, like local initiatives in our regions against domestic violence. And I'm so happy because of that. I'm unhappy because of COVID isolation and the reaction of our officials, because nothing were done from their side. And I'm very happy because of our society, not just fundamentalist or fundamentalistic wing of our society, but the vast majority of our society. They're the brilliant one.
Thank you very much, Alena. And I think we should wind up still with a positive note, and thank you for setting that. And actually the invitation for cooperation, if I can interpret it so, because we've got a comment from Maxine David, who asks about the basically openness of the colleagues from Russia and Ukraine to speak about this not a bit marginalized issues in the academic and academic and political platforms. So perhaps you could connect, because Maxine is a university lecturer, and perhaps you could cover these issues more also for the international audience to reduce those discussions about actually the East-West divide, because it's about the human values, and women's rights are human rights, as we know. I would like to thank you very much, our brilliant three speakers, our audience. And I think what's so important is that recognizing all the difficulties and all the awful figures, the statistics that we have heard today, we still remain positive, and we still stress that the initiative really comes from the civil society. And I'd want to conclude recalling Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the late US Supreme Court Justice and the pioneer on gender equality in the US, but also in the world. And she said that real change, enduring change, came not from law, but from the society. And I think it's a very good sign for this increasing debate about countering domestic violence. And it's great that so many young people and civil society activists, both men and women in Central and Eastern Europe, do want to have this debate and do want to have more equality. On this positive note, thank you very much for your participation, and have a good afternoon.